So I became a mother, and everything did change for me, not in a good way initially. But what I did realise immediately was that it wasn't about me anymore. And I think I found that quite hard to accept. And I tried to resist it for a while. So I didn't have that same type of connection that other mothers have initially. But I had always known that these children are the most important things or projects or anything that I've actually created and been part of.
Why did you want to have children?
I didn't.
Say, I didn't want
I
to
didn't
have
know.
children.
I didn't want to have children. I actually didn't think it was a possibility because I had endometriosis and polycystic ovaries. And my gynecologist had always said it's a very slim chance that you could get pregnant. So I lived life as though I was not going to get pregnant. And it was only when I turned 36 that I became pregnant by chance. And it was still quite a heady rush of a life, and not one that would suit motherhood. And so I reacted quite negatively, and I felt wise, instead of being joyous that, oh my gosh, I'm pregnant, I was like, oh no, now what? What do I do? I don't know. I've never even thought about this or how it would make me feel. And that was definitely reflected in what resulted, because then after 3 months I miscarried. And I felt that was a very strong message. I think there was a turning point for me there, thinking someone up there wants me to perhaps have a child and perhaps do something. And then I became much more mindful of day-to-day actions, like just of eating, of sleeping, of not going out binge drinking all the time. And then I became pregnant again within weeks. And I was so much more careful, and I didn't want to be surrounded by people I was surrounded with at work. So I used it as an opportunity, and I said, look, guys, I'm actually pregnant. I hid it for a few months until I knew the pregnancy was viable. And I told them, look, I can't be around stress because I've already miscarried. And I believe I've miscarried because I just surround myself with shit, and I eat shit, and everything around me is awful. And so it worked out. I feel it was timely because it worked out at a point I was feeling so disillusioned. I was so unhappy. And I think this was, I was gifted a child to force me to change. Having children initially did not feel like a miracle to me, even though it actually was the way I got pregnant. And I felt quite unhappy and disconnected. And really, I was just disconnected from myself. I just started this journey of self-learning and self-discovery, and I felt that now I have to concentrate on something else. And the industry I was in is not conducive for motherhood at all. So I thought one of two ways. I either just get full-time help and do full-time work, or I try and try and get some balance, get a few out, be able to work from home, which they did set me up to work from home. And then at least I could embrace some of it. And in fact, I felt that it was even worse. I should have actually just done all or nothing, either side. But that took me a while. I was so keen to just keep my foot in the door, not be judged, because the minute you have a child in my industry, at that point you're just looked down on as though you don't have that same utility, you don't have that same value, because you're not going to be, they think, right, you're just going to think about your child all the time. And actually I was the opposite. I had my most profitable year the year I had my child, my first son. So I definitely proved something to myself by doing that, and realised, well, hold on, I've done half of that from home, so things can change. I tried to reject motherhood. I tried to reject my perception of motherhood, because whenever I spoke to my friends from home who had children, I found them really dull, and all they wanted to speak about was their children, which is a great and natural thing, but that just wasn't me, and that would never be me. And I think I was really conscious of that fact when I had a child. I didn't even want to talk about my child all the time. Those moments, they smiled after 6 weeks. No, that's like naturally that happens. And I found myself being quite negative towards them, and then even more so wanting to get back into that man's world initially, because it was free of that. And it was interesting and it was fun. And this side of it was, oh, okay, can you get your baby to latch onto your breast? Oh my God, I can't do this. I absolutely cannot do this. I'm not built for this. What am I going to do with my life? What am I going to do with my life?
Did that affect your love of your children?
It did initially. It took me a while.
Yeah.
So, and the way I felt about motherhood definitely affected the connection I had to when my son was born first. Yes, I thought he was gorgeous. I had love, but I didn't have that all-encompassing engrossment that mothers around me were having. And I thought, there's a gene missing in me. Something is wrong, that this isn't happening, or I'm not feeling this. And any excuse I could find, I'd go to work. I feel not having those same emotions definitely made me feel, I don't know, I didn't have a role model. I didn't have anyone to observe that had done this, apart from these great CEOs of, and I often looked at people of colour, and the only Indian CEO I knew at that time was Indra Nooyi, their CEO of PepsiCo. So she was my role model, and she is a brilliant woman, and I aspire in many ways to be like her. But then when I saw her life, she was never with her children, and that's not the journey I wanted to take. I didn't have that much ambition that I wanted it to completely dominate my life. And now that I work with so many women and I meet so many women, I meet more women like myself who don't have that same feeling. And I wish I knew people like that before, when I had my child, because I as you said, I would have accepted myself, I feel. So all this time I'm going to work, I'm definitely disrespected and looked at in a very different way. And then when I'm by myself, I disrespect myself because I don't have that connection with that child that I feel, or my perception is that I should feel like this. In my head, I was beating myself up all the time. There was nowhere that I felt safe. There was nowhere that I felt I could thrive. And I didn't also have any other women around me that were going through a similar situation. They either had given up work a while ago and, seemed quite accepting of and enjoying the role that had been bestowed upon them. Or on the other hand, there were mothers that just purely went to work and never saw their kids. So I just felt I was caught in this middle ground, not quite knowing, and not knowing how to feel. I think all my career, throughout my professional life, I'd never known what it was like to work with women, or even be in the company of women, other than for a dinner or drinks. It was never anything deeper than that. And once I had my children and started spending time with women, again, I feel I metamorphosized, and I turned into a different person in a really positive way. I realized I could be vulnerable, for one, which took me a long time to get to a place of acceptance of that myself, let alone being able to do that with someone else. And also just the shared journeys that we all have, whether it's about ourselves, about our children, about our friendships, just sharing our woes, sharing our happiness. And I think that level and connection. And for me, it's been all about connection. And I feel now there's that saying that you attract your tribe, or your vibe attracts your tribe. And I really believe that, because now I feel I have like-minded people around me, like-minded beautiful women around me who challenge me and who also make me feel that I'm loved. I think for me, so now there's this rhetoric going that, females can do it. Oh, yes, they can. But there's always a sacrifice. And I feel not wanting to work together with different mindsets, which men have, is slightly short-sighted. I think there has to be a balance redressed, but shutting out men is doing effectively what happened to us for generations. And what good did that do? I think speaking to the men I feel they need to witness that men are more process. The majority of men are more process driven. They almost need to see evidence, whereas women will take women for their word. Like, just because I felt something, if I communicated that, they'd believe me. If a man can't really articulate that in his mind or make sense of it in his mind. So for me, if I take myself an example and how my husband and I have been, it's taken us coaching together and to understand each other's worlds because don't forget, they've been brought up, men have been brought up a certain way with biases just as much as we have. And so it's nobody's fault of how they've been brought up, but I feel then you make a conscious choice whether you want to continue to be like that or not. I've taken the approach of my son of respecting everybody and trying to present them all as equals. I don't want it to be how I was brought up. What was the saying? Like, all people are born equal, some more equal than others. That's immediately telling me that there are people above me and people below me, and not giving any context to it. So that's my bias. I want him to realise you treat everybody with respect, and how you treat people how you would like to be treated, whether they're women, whether they're men, whichever sex they choose to be or identify with. And that's my constant message to him. And I feel I'm conflicted daily because he's at a single-sex school. So I feel I have to fight even harder. It's lucky that he's got a sister, so he'll see that side of life. And I'm grateful for that, because she presents a different argument to him every day. And she challenges the way he thinks, and vice versa. So I feel they get a good understanding initially of how the other sex are. But they're always, like, my daughter will always question everything, and I think he doesn't naturally have that. So I have to encourage that by more conversation, more understanding, and anything he asks, I don't want to feel uncomfortable. I don't want him to feel uncomfortable about it. So I feel women generally are more open to hearing about change. They may not want to execute, but the fact is they're willing to go that first step. That's what I've found so far, whereas when I'm talking to guys, they're still very much in, no, this is our way and that's it. And it seems more dogmatic, more linear, and more insular even. And that's obviously the way they've been wired as well. So I feel it's a harder sell almost to try and encourage openness with males than it is with females. My feeling is change is slow anyway, because people are so resistant to change. They're fearful of it. And what people don't understand, they fear. And I feel that's how the world is led, especially now. So I think change will be slow regardless. I feel there has to be monstrous events for there to be a shift in the needle to shift. When you think of Black Lives Matter as an example, Black Lives Matter started in 2013. No one heard of it until George Floyd got murdered in 2020. That's 7 years after the initiative was set up. And I'm using that as an example because they amplified their voice. Whereas I feel other races and genders don't amplify their voice, whether that's through, when I think of how my Indian culture is, we're submissive. You know, we've had equal amounts of like awful things happen to our ancestors, but I don't see anyone shouting about it. They may hashtag Black Lives Matter, which is completely inappropriate, but I don't feel that they've taken it less seriously, or they've allowed it to happen. I feel to a large extent, yes, socioeconomic for sure. When I think of South Asians that I know, they're all very much driven, pushed by the parents, driven to almost become these corporate beings, churning money, churning achievement, churning success, or whatever success looks like. Whereas I feel the black community didn't have that. They started from so much lower down the rung than, South Asians. I mean, I'm generalising, obviously there are many exceptions. But yes, I do feel when I think of the bias that I had, it definitely, my opinion of that race were that they're definitely lower down on the socioeconomic scale than perhaps Chinese or Indians were. If I was going to make a t-shirt for a conference reflecting what I wanted the audience to take away, it would probably read connection. Because I feel ultimately everyone wants to feel connected. No matter what that connection or who that connection is with, they want that feeling of belonging, of being heard.
And cut.